Hi guys, my name is Olga Noel and I make ball jointed dolls. Today we're going to talk about symmetry and the way I achieve it while sculpting ball jointed dolls traditionally. You know that my material of choice is polymer clay. I typically work with polymer clay quite eagerly because it is very easy to fix those tiny mistakes. But sometimes when the body part is detached from the neighboring parts, it is really easy to lose the sense of flow, the sense of the body movement, the motions that I'm going to achieve through creation of ball jointed dolls. This is why I string the doll, in this case my boy doll, and I try to take a look at how symmetrical he is and how good the flow of the body is in general. I start with a thread and I do not cut it from the spool. I attach a little piece of polymer clay to the end of the thread, attach this to the topmost part of his head, of his cranium, and the spool serves as a weight that keeps this thread taut. The thread itself serves as a divider. I use mechanical pencil to mark the parts where I need to add things or detract them. Here I also use calipers, but honestly quite often I just use my eyes, and thread helps me keep track of the middle line and the symmetry itself. No matter what you do in traditional sculpting, you won't be able to achieve perfect symmetry. You can have a good eye, you can have the best sense of symmetry in things. It's still quite hard to make two parts 100% symmetrical, and nobody asks you to. A lot of the times you need to just feel the flow of the body and add tiny pieces of clay, as I'm going to do here, in those parts where it is necessary. A lot of people work with traditional sculpture because they are not striving for symmetry. A lot of ball jointed doll artists choose traditional sculpting because our brain is really used to seeing asymmetry in people's bodies. Vice versa, when you go for digital sculpture, you feel as if the doll is a doll, because no man, no human is perfectly symmetrical. And a lot of people in ball jointed dolls community value this asymmetry because this is like almost makes the doll look like a human being. That said, you should absolutely go for as much symmetry as you can give to the doll, because you are going to lack. Try making it feel as natural as possible. Here I add the tiniest blobs of clay, and with a pencil I mark the places where I need to get rid of this like more pronounced landscape. I also use calipers ruler in order for me to see whether everything is perpendicularly aligned, and if not, I also add tiny blobs of clay. Sometimes one blob is not enough and I go for the second one, and here I'm speeding things up a little bit. It's like 1.5, but I look at this like ruler, the calipers ruler, in relation to this thread in order for me to observe the symmetry as much as I can. I noticed that the thigh joints are not as symmetrical as I wanted them to be, and after this video I actually fixed them, both of them, because the slits were a little bit off. I also take my wooden cuticle pusher and start smoothing those blobs out so that my brain is not like, it's not playing tricks on me. I also need to be sure that I've added enough clay, and without evening it out, without pushing it into the sculpt, I won't know whether it was okay or not, because this is sort of like a separate form that sits on top of the form, the existing one, and sometimes your brain can play tricks on you and can lie to you basically that like this is going to be the exact amount needed for those two parts to be symmetrical. In reality, you will need a little bit more, but you won't know it until you actually smooth things out. You will see in the video that I primarily work with his torso and the lower torso at that. But I also try to keep track of minor irregularities of the legs, and I observe him like in 360. I try to rotate him a lot, and I try to observe whether everything is fine or not. I get rid of the thread really fast. It's obviously sped up. I cut a lot of parts here. I work with a thread for first maybe hour, and then I start working with my eyes only, trying to separate the parts in two equal things, and I try to switch my focus from one side to the other really fast, sort of blinking from right to left, so that I could observe whether everything is symmetrical or not, and sort of ask my brain or task my brain to find asymmetries that I can fix easily. As usual, as with every sculpt, you do not work on one area alone. Try to not isolate the places where you place those tiny clay blobs. I try to flip him, to rotate him a lot, because in this case my eyes are not fixed on one task and they're not sort of become really tired because I use them to look at just one thing. I try to work with the front, with the back, with the side, and because the tension in his body is a little bit on the weaker side, because I don't want to overstretch the elastic and, I don't know, God forbid something cracks and I'm like 99% ready with the sculpt, it is going to be a pain to fix that. I have to constantly adjust his body position so that he is standing perfectly still. I could use hot glue to fix him like in one position. I could also use a little bit more of a tension, but I didn't want to do that. And sometimes, you probably saw me do this, I use tape to sort of fix some joints in one position. I didn't do it here because tape would ruin my perception of the lines of the body. Sometimes I do use it when it is not so important to observe so much. I also debated censoring his like lower part, lower torso, but I will have to do it on post because right now it is impossible for me to see all the lines, all the muscle flow if I just cover one part of him with a tape. And this is one of the reasons why I postponed releasing the video, releasing this process of me finding symmetry for so long, because post-production is going to be a really lengthy process and it's going to take me at least one extra week, but it's all worth it. And this demonstration of his ability, or of the ability of his body, is going to give me a lot of useful information on what I have to fix when I disassemble the body. And I ultimately am going to disassemble him, but with all the information stored in my brain where I should add things, what things should be a little bit altered. And now I'm basically playing with the body because I honestly lack motivation sometimes to just continue with minor edits. And this potential, this like posing, keeps me inspired basically. I really like his ballet dancer feet. I also really enjoy his hands and elbows for some reason. But yeah, all great stuff has to come to an end, and we are disassembling the body and trying to fix those minor things that we have outlined previously and work with his lower torso a lot. Here, for some reason, I don't really have the footage of me like fully disassembling the body. I am more on a partly assembled basis here, especially with the legs and with the upper torso, but the lower torso is going to get premium treatment, so to say. All the tricks that I'm using here, the turpentine, the cuticle pusher, everything you've already seen in this video where I talk about how to work with polymer clay, and there are so many more things that I mentioned. Here I use more than this like basic tool set. I basically used anything that came to my hand out of my special drawer where all my instruments chill. I also don't hesitate to use the base or the shaft of any instrument because usually it is really comfortable for me to just use those rounded sides of those instruments for everything, basically, while I'm sculpting. I also smooth it with a lot of pinin, and I try to make it seem as if there is like no clear edge between newly sculpted parts and the old parts that are baked. But sometimes there is no need to be super smooth about it. You can just lay it on top, try to somehow leave it there so that it sticks and it's not falling off. And after, if you prefer carving to sculpting, you technically can do that as well. You can put a bigger blob to the place where you need to add some landscape, bake it, and then carve away. It's also an option. Although if you prefer sculpting with a knife, you can go right ahead. Here it is more beneficial because you are sort of pushing new clay into the old one, and the smoother you make the transition, the better it is. I also use a lot of those loop tools. They help me with smoothing the surface. And if you held a nice quality silicone brush in your hand, you can probably feel that the impact that the silicone brush is making is really similar to your wet fingers. Here I use a lot of pinin to sort of have this frictionless push into clay, because even if we train really hard, we rarely develop our muscles to be fully symmetrical. For example, I don't know, like abs that I'm working on, or oblique muscles that are also trying to be defined here, are going to be developed with different regions, so to say. They are going to be a little bit disproportionate or non-symmetrical, but all the muscles should feel as if they belong on this body, so they should sort of complement each other on both sides. And this is what I'm trying to achieve while pushing those muscles and trying to manipulate them and leave them as natural as possible. Here you can see that our first attempt at bringing this sculpt to symmetry has succeeded, and it's after the first bake. I'm trying to find where the highest point of the sculpt is, because these points are the ones that we're going to align the opposite side to, and I'm trying to sort of mark all those highest regions so that I could see better, see more clearly. There's an alternative here. You can use primer of a lighter color, preferably the color that is lighter than the color of the clay body you've chosen, but I use plain old pencil, mechanical pencil, and mechanical pencil's lead. I also use here the nail buff. It is of a really bad quality. This is the reason why I use it for sticking U pieces of sanding sponge, and I use hot glue because the other option is just painter's tape and it doesn't hold it really well. So this is why I use hot glue, and I typically change it 5 to 10 times because this is much more comfortable to hold it like this, and buff is bigger and my hands don't hurt. But sometimes I also use those sanding paper pieces that you can see here without any help of a buff, because I need those curvatures to be respected as well. So here's the part that I would much rather change right now, but I'm not gonna. And this tailbone, the beginning of it, or like this yummy puffy part on every single behind, I often work with it for a really long time, even after everything else is sort of completed, but I really like it, so it's kind of guilty pleasure for me to make it a little bit more pronounced than it typically is observed in real human beings. I also try to make the spine, the curvature, the way everything is connected a little bit more cohesive. I also work with Q-tips so that this curvature is a little bit more natural. In the end, I understand that I could do a little bit of a better job to create this pronunciation, this definition of certain muscles, but I typically know where I can push it a little bit further, and I do it in raw porcelain. The thing with raw porcelain is that when you want to push the form to make it a little bit more sort of concave, it is fairly easy. When you want to sculpt on top or add volume for porcelain, it typically is more risky, because when you fire it, the tiniest air bubble can ruin every single effort you've put in. So I typically have an idea where I want to push it a little bit more, to push it in a little bit more, but if I want to add volume, I typically add volume on these stages, and I would much rather cut it away than like put something on top of raw porcelain. I also use my brush a lot here for sculpting, for like smoothing or pushing new clay into the old clay. And after the second bake of this particular process, I begin defining things with my knife. I work with blades here and with Japanese carving knives, trying to add volume to abs, and I try to move really slowly because otherwise I'm going to ruin the progress I achieved. At this point, I could have left it as is, but I really wanted this slight definition. It shouldn't be like he's trying too hard. A lot of the times here, I would go with Dremel instead of just sanding paper and sanding buffs and sanding sponges. But here I didn't want to plug it in, and it was fairly late in the evening. I didn't want to bother my neighbors, so I decided to go with this technique. I also look at things connected together. I'm not reassembling the boy, but I'm trying to show myself whether the flow of the muscle is correct. I can see that oblique muscles are popping a little bit too much, and there is not enough of this like lower belly definition. The trick here is to take a look at references as well. I have some on my computer, and I also feel that the body lacks this belly fat, lower belly fat, because this will make the whole figure a little bit smoother, a little bit more fluid, and add this roundness to it. It will make him a little bit more alive and less flat, less artificial. Also, I want those oblique muscles to be a little bit smoother, because right now they are popping a little too much, as if he's doing side crunches a lot, and this belly fat would add some guilty pleasures to his life. Late night cake. And we will also redefine his belly button. Belly button is actually, for me personally, they are the hardest to work, the hardest to shape naturally, or more natural than I typically do. I looked at belly buttons for a really long time for this sculpt, and this one is not final in the end. As I remember, I just gouged it out and sculpted a new one, and also this is an angel body, obviously, and in a new body I had to resculpt it yet again. So for a brief moment of time I was great at sculpting those. Right now I'm not so sure. These are my last attempts to smooth it out. I don't really like this huge definition of this belly button going into lower belly, but I use the smallest brush and the end of the smallest brush to smooth things out. Last touches, and this is how everything turned out in the end. Kind of abrupt. I just haven't filmed much of final result. Oopsie. After everything was covered in primer and I assembled him countless times, you probably have seen this in my IG or on TikTok or anywhere that you follow me, unless you just found me. In this case, welcome. Yeah, this is pretty much how I work with symmetry on a later stages of my sculpt. I really hope my technique is a little bit helpful, or at least you found it enjoyable to watch how I struggle with symmetry. If you liked the video, click a like button, subscribe if you haven't, and support me on Patreon, like these beautiful people do. Thank you guys for watching, bye!